Aloha, kakahiyaka. Good morning, everyone from Honolulu, Hawaii. My deepest appreciation to Ben Bowler and the entire Unity Earth team, and the many co sponsors and volunteers who made Peace Week 2023 possible. Peace Week marks the conclusion of the 99 Days of Peace through Unity program, which began in June during the annual celebration of World Unity Week. Planning and coordinating these worldwide events requires incredible coordination and commitment, and we applaud the efforts of Ben Bowler and his entire Unity Earth team. Today, I am pleased to welcome a panel of powerful, influential women to discuss women's perspectives on peace and their thoughts on women as powerful agents of transformation for peace. 2 billion people live in conflict areas today, and women and girls often bear the brunt of the suffering. Among the millions of war refugees and migrants, women are primarily responsible for feeding, sheltering, and caring for children and the elderly. Women and girls experience conflict-related sexual violence, including rape, sexual slavery, human trafficking, forced prostitution, and other forms of abuse, and maternal mortality is extremely high in conflict areas. However, women are powerful agents of transformation who, despite their marginalization and suffering in conflict situations, have important experiences and perspectives critical to attaining peace, but they are underrepresented in the peace process. This situation must change because peace cannot be achieved when half of the world's population is marginalized or excluded, including women in conflict resolution, peace negotiations, and rebuilding communities devastated by war is known to result in better outcomes and longer lasting peace. With their innate nurturing and concern about care of others, women are working for peace quietly and passionately, in many cases not receiving any credit or acknowledgement. The four powerful women joining us today for this discussion are deeply respected and highly accomplished experts in their fields, each with a unique perspective on our topic today. They are Keisha Bush, Aza Karam, Manalali Aluli Mayer, and Deborah Sanchez. You will find their bios in the chat box as they begin their presentations. And I want to thank all of our panelists for joining today. So we will begin our program with Keisha Bush. Keisha, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And thank you for including me in such a wonderful panel with other amazing women and people who are committed to social justice and equity around the world and across the globe. How I'm going to do my presentation today is to sort of just talk about my own experience and work a little bit. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm first generation American on my mother's side of the family. My family on my maternal side arrived in the US to Boston, Massachusetts in the 60s, fleeing persecution from Honduras. And my mother is a naturalized citizen. She came here as a child. And we, first generation of Americans on my mother's side, my dad is Black American, we grew up in abject poverty. And when I often think about how I moved out of poverty growing up on welfare, and a lot of the violence, sexual violence, child abuse, to a space where I now, live in Boston, Massachusetts. After traveling around the world, and I'll talk about that in a second, I realized I don't see myself so much as, I see myself as someone who's activated, someone who practices equity. I don't just talk about it. It's the way I treat everyone who is around me. It's on a daily basis. And I see myself as a navigator. That is my really new thing right now. I'm not fighting anything. I'm navigating this world in which we've all found ourselves. And when I see an obstacle, my question is, how do I navigate this? So let's jump forward. I used education pursuing my education, an undergraduate degree in business, a master's degree in fine arts, creative writing, and now I'm at Harvard pursuing a second master's degree in religion with a focus in religion, literature, and culture. And my background, I wear many hats. So I have one background in communications and marketing, and I pursued that for 20 years. And then after a while working in nonprofit Oxfam America or Oxfam Great Britain, really, and then the LGBT Community Center in New York City, I decided to run off into the sunset and be an artist, and switched gears. And after living in West Africa for 4 years, I decided to write about the Taliban in Senegal, who are a human rights crisis. These are children who are caught in a situation of child slavery and abuse. They have parents, but are given to a religious leader who, instead of teaching them the Quran, forces them to beg 12 hours a day, and they have to bring back a daily quota. And when the book that I wrote, No Heaven for Good Boys, came out with Random House in 2021, I found that this is going on in northern Nigeria and other parts of the world. And so I often like to play little sort of experiments with myself in the world. I said, can I activate, right? Can I be an activist of some sort through traditional publishing? So No Heaven for Good Boys is a fictionalized tale of this very real human rights crisis. And the reason why I used fiction was to reach out to a greater audience, an audience that may not, like many of us, read the newspaper and become activated or read nonfiction. So I'm also, as I navigate this world, I'm interested in using like non-traditional forms of reaching community, reaching everyday readers and reaching everyday people. And along this journey and coming back to school, I ended up and am currently working with the EPICS-B Center for Health and Human Rights as their head of communications. I see communications, I see my writing, I see the action that I take on a daily basis as a vehicle to support the work of others, to highlight and to elevate the work of others. And so I do that through my job, my 9-to-5 job, in terms of the programming at the EPICS-B Center for Health and Human Rights. We have programs, but based on racial justice. So the Romani people who are a marginalized community, especially in Europe, and are, one of the communities that are victims of the Holocaust, but are not often talked about. So like a double erasure for that community. Our programming includes reparations and showing the health, wealth, connection between marginalized communities and shortened lifespans. Palestine, we have a Palestine program, and also distress migration. So looking at communities along the border and in Latin America and that movement. And then our last sort of focus is climate change and how climate change impacts the health of communities. And we can see that literally every week in the news. Like, I don't think there's been a week where there wasn't a climactic event happening that is impacting communities, and most often marginalized communities at the center of that. So how do we wear all of the hats that we do as women without sort of exhausting ourselves, right? And I think part of it is when I have reframed my work and my effort as the navigator, as somebody who's navigating this world, if you end up going down the wrong road and it's a dead end, you turn around. You say, oh, I went down the wrong road. Let me turn around. Okay, I have to, make a bit more effort to go back out onto the main street or the main road and then re-navigate my way to the place that I was heading. And I think if I can leave anything in this space today, is this sort of epiphany that I had about the work that I am putting into the world as this person who's navigating the obstacles around me. Yeah. And hoping not to run out of gas. And when I do, I stop at a rest stop, like I take a rest. And, what is self-care and how do we rejuvenate ourselves? Because we're not this endless sort of being. One other epiphany that I'll share is I realized I'm not racing to my grave. I'm in a marathon, right? So this navigation is a marathon and I have to pace myself so that I'm here to continue the work that I'm hoping to put in the world and for others that I'm hoping to support. So thank you. I will end there.
Well, thank you so much, Keisha. You've raised some really important points for all women and people everywhere, actually, on self-care and being navigators in the journey of life. So thank you so much. And now we have Dr. Aza Karam. And if you could please take the floor now, Aza, we'd really appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed. Audrey, this is a privilege to be here with you and with these amazing women. And I also want to add my word of thanks to Ben Bowler and Unity Earth for this amazing series of Sequence for Peace that we're all taking part in. I also want to, and I have to, begin by saying great gratitude and appreciation for the Siwanuk people on whose land I now stand in Westchester, New York. And I realize that this always will be their land and their spirit runs through it, for which I'm deeply grateful. I think I wanted to just, if you will, be a little bit of a provocative agent. Please bear with me. I think what Keisha told us sets us beautifully in terms of also the fact that one of the things women do almost as a natural state of affairs is multitask. We do plenty things at the same time. And it comes natural. It's like you don't even think twice about it. I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this at the same time. And indeed, it begs the need for learning how to take care of oneself, which most societies usually try not to socialize women into. Like, women are supposed to be there serving, doing. That's most societies are structured that way. And so I think we get caught in this paranormal world of doing. And it actually is a skill to learn how to look after oneself. And it's not a form of narcissism. It's not a bad thing. It's an absolutely necessary thing so that we can continue to serve and to do and to love and to care and to nurture. And this brings me to my second point. This assumption that women are all good all the time towards each other and they save the world. Look, I love it. I really do. But it's so not true. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that women are human, and humans generally are not all good all the time, always for everybody. And sometimes there are ambitions, there are needs, there are cravings, there are situations in which there's greed, there's definitely hunger, there is disparity, there is inequalities, things that ultimately, just like with men, end up making the desire for power sometimes more than what we need to do with that power. And so this notion that women are all good all the time, I think just let's not put that burden, because there's a difference between humans and angels, I think, and women are human. I'm sure they have the predisposition to be angels, but I think women are human too. And claiming our human rights, which is what we are always doing, also requires us to step back and reflect on the fact that we too bear a burden of responsibility in the power dynamics that shape our world, we too have a responsibility in causing harm. This is not all good all the time, everywhere. And if we put that burden on any human being, it would be deeply taxing and deeply, deeply unjust. We should take responsibility for the fact that sometimes the most harmful of practices, especially traditional customary practices, are not actually perpetrated by men against women. Sometimes they're perpetrated by women against women, and sometimes it's done out of a deep care and concern for the protection of the girl. And so let's just be human, which also means take responsibility for the not so wonderful and not so terrific part, because, and that's point number 3, when we deal in a world of diversity, which is quintessentially our world, it is important to understand that just as we are culpable and can be culpable, that also means that we are empowered to be different, to be nurturing, caring, healing, and all the good stuff. But you can't be all the good stuff always, because we do have to take responsibility for some of the things that are not so good that women do. One of the refrains I've been hearing, unfortunately, a little too frequently for my liking, is when women argue with other women, or there's a combat situation, or there's some issue of dissonance, then it gives so many of our most beloved male champions a chance to step back and say, well, you know, it's what women do to each other. And that really, really upsets me. Because on the one hand, it positions us in this, oh, they're always fighting with each other, that's so woman-like. And on the other hand, it divests them of their responsibility. So the way to actually not find ourselves being told that or being confronted with that is to acknowledge that when we argue with one another, which is actually quite helpful and healthy, we have to do it in such a way that is ultimately an example for everybody else of how you can argue, disagree, but still be civil and still show care and still show nurture. Some women are superb at that. Many of us struggle to get to that stage. And actually, our, I believe, primary obligation to transform our societies is to be kind to one another, because we won't be able to be kind to one another if we are so busy being unkind to ourselves, and if we are so busy fighting and disagreeing with one another and tearing each other to pieces. So that was my 4th point. And my 5th and last point is just to point out there is a wave of transformation happening in the world today, where many more women are in positions of different positions of authority, responsibility, and as change makers. It's a trend that is unstoppable, and it is happening, and we're living on the cusp of this trend. The new normal is women in charge, which also means 2 things. One, that the resistance against us, the misogyny, is and will be at its height. And 2, that if we don't start being different in our disagreement and dissonance with one another, we will tear each other apart even more. So there is no time like now to take on board the responsibility that just as we can heal, we can make war. And because we know we can make war, we need to be able to heal oneself and each other before we think we can heal the rest of the world. And that is, I think, the responsibility we were created for. Doesn't matter which tradition, faith tradition we believe in, we were created to look after one another. And we were created to do so in a way that is fundamentally different and fundamentally complementary to the way that men do it. So we are different, but we are not different by being the same in nasty ways, but we are different because we can heal one another and each other differently. And that power we have to continue to tap on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karam. And you also raise very important points that when women argue with one another, we can argue and disagree, but still be civil. And this applies across the board, across genders, not just women, and to transform our society with being kind. Very important words. And of course, you mentioned that women are leading the way, and this is an unstoppable wave that is taking place, and we have to keep cognizant of misogyny, and that if we ourselves as women are not being different, we will tear each other apart, and we need to heal ourselves and each other. Very important points. Thank you so much for raising them, Dr. Karam. And now we will go to Manulani Aluli Mayer. So Manulani, you now have the floor.
Aloha mai kākoa pau i ku'u hoa. Aloha everyone. Happy Peace Week. Mahalo nui for this opportunity for Hawaii to weigh in, because as you've all experienced the kaumaha, the change that is Lahaina, we as Native people here have begun to understand the ancient name for Lahaina, which is Laha'aina, the place of prophecy. So let us begin this prophetic time with all of you as women, ushering in Peace Week. So let us go toward this topic with aloha in our hearts. I just want to say that I love, Keisha, your idea of reframing and the navigation is kind of like meditation, you know? Meditation is when you can stop your mind and change your mind. Stop your mind and stop your mind. And I think that's what you're doing in navigation. I love that navigation. That's what's helped my people return back to cultural strength, is when we can navigate through open ocean currents, stars, winds, and each other's, and faith in each other. And I think that's what women bring inevitably, is this complete capacity to absolutely love each other, act dysfunctional with each other, but ultimately we are the healers, and we are the birth mothers. We are the yin yin yin. We are the Pachamama. We are the Papa Hanau Moku. We are the earth, and it's not a metaphor. You know, when we say Papa, we Papa Hanau Moku, we're talking about our mother, and I think that's the difference. And women carry that capacity. So, Keisha, mahalo nui for becoming a navigator, because that is special. You'll find new shores and new people to work with, because it is, how do I navigate through this so that everyone survives? Blessings for your work, Keisha. Thank you for that. And you know what, when you navigate with others, we call that mutual emergence. It's ho'opono. We emerge mutually, and we cause each other's mutual evolution. And that is what the purpose of conflict is. Thank you, Aza. Thank you so much for that. The call to heal ourselves, so that when we do experience a conflict, we understand the actual purpose of it, which is unity. I think the purpose of conflict is unity. You'd think us Hawaiians would be so unified because we get so much conflict, but we're getting there. We're getting there, because aloha is our culture, and aloha is the center of our practice here in Hawaii. You know, ulua e kevalina a keloha, one of my favorite olelo no iao proverbs. This one we offer it to Peace Week. It means loving is the practice of an awake mind. Loving is the practice of an awake mind. And I think that's what our responsibility is to the planet. And I think you're actually describing is a ma'alama, to care and nurture ourselves so that we can care and nurture others. And ma'alama for us in Hawaii is ma, the site of lama, which is a very, very unusual illumination, the idea of illumination. It's a lama is kind of like if you see a lama forest, it looks black, like it's burnt, but the wood is yellow, and it's a sacred wood. And ma'alama means to be kind of at the site of sacredness. So when you're in the site of conflict, Rumi said, we are both the disease and that which cures it. So I have learned my best lessons through conflict. So thank you for that reminder. You know, we went to Molokai this past weekend to empty my cousin's house because he died, Dr. Emmett Aluli. He helped bring Kaho'olawe, our island that was bombed. He and his partner, Daviana McGregor, were so instrumental in bringing our island back. They would occupy the island almost every month for years, 40 years. So emptying his house filled with the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana paperwork, the Pele Defense Fund paperwork, and all the things that he's done was so mythic and so, you know, it was laced with tragedy because we heard two of our friends had killed themselves this weekend. So we are always in an onslaught of sorrow. But when that navigation kicks in, Keisha, and when we understand the purpose of what kaumaha means or what grief means for us, we are women. We are the receptors. We are the communion. We are the rise of humanity. We are the rise. Kupuna said to me once, she said, Manu, don't worry about the men and women thing, just women. Yeah, and they're talking about wahine. You guys, we just got to know what foretell the man. But we better have a vision. We got to know what foretell the man. So what are we saying this week, in this Peace Week? I want to bring forth the primacy of aloha, the actual core of our primal energetic transformation is not a strategy. It's a way of life. It's a way of nurturing. It's a kindness that people remember for the rest of their life. And I believe that is the center of what women bring. Because we're mothers, we're aunties, we're siblings, we're teachers. We are the people that bring peace to the planet. We have to take up that responsibility. And there is the wahine, the time of hine, of hina, the lunar capacity, the nurturing capacity, the ebb and flow of life capacity. So that is why we bear that responsibility. Thank you for that reminder. I bear that responsibility to ho'opono, to activate, to be activated, and therefore to activate others by my own principles and by my own embodiment of principles. In Hawaii, the embodiment of aloha, compassion, love, purpose is done by the embodiment of pono, which is truth, wisdom. So you get that truth, wisdom, and you get that love, compassion. They both go together. And that's what women bring. In this Peace Week, we here in Hawaii view Laha'aina, this time of radical prophecy, and we take that seriously. And this panel is part of that change. And so is your work, Audrey. Mahalo nui no kea ai pono, mahalo nui no kea ike pono. Thank you for these ideas, everyone. I look forward to your mana'o, Deborah, because of the work you bring to the world. So mahalo nui, mahalo nui, mahalo nui.
So thank you so much, Manulani, and my sincerest, condolences over the death of Dr. Emmett, and he was such a force in Hawaii Nei, and we certainly send him our aloha in all the other realms that he now travels in. So, and for your powerful words and the values and principles that you shared with us today, from the perspective of using the Hawaiian words, which ultimately the sacred values and concepts that we all share through all of the faith traditions are so powerful. And thank you for saying that, it's not a strategy, it's primal transformation. It's a way of life. It's a kindness. And, the people who bring forth peace to the planet and the nurturing capacity of women and the principles of the embodiment of truth, wisdom, and compassion. And that's what women bring, at this time of what you called radical prophecy, and that this panel is part of that change. So thank you so much for sharing that. Just beautiful. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Deborah Sanchez. So Deborah, please, you now have the floor.
Hakukichi chanti ke kikikich, shakswalal kuku kaktis moech wala santi kaktingles, kapanish umolo ki swahihi nakalamo ilimu, ka kapanish akimok etono, otam ke eraramui. Kushishi snakuti. I'm happy to see you all. I wanted to introduce myself in one of the Chumash languages, the Smuich language, and I'll tell you why. Because I think regaining our languages as indigenous people from all over the world helps to solidify our worldview. And we have been there through many, many years, and in particular, women, I agree with what Ari said earlier, have been the victims of oppression, of violence, and I believe that global peaceful transformation really begins with us, right? And this worldview. So I was lucky to be born into a family of storytellers who looked at the world quite differently than the people that were around us. And I think at a very young age, I realized I didn't really fit into the places that were like, say, in Los Angeles, where I grew up primarily. And then I did live for a short time on the Morongo Reservation with my grandmother. But I think feeling different has you question, like your being, your purpose. And I think as a young person, you think, am I supposed to be going in a different direction? There were times when I was young and in ceremony where I thought, we're praying for the whole world and there's 8 of us here. How can that be impactful to an entire world? And it was until I was a little bit older, I realized it actually has a huge impact and how we see things, because the things we get involved with as women, the things that we do, how we treat one another, how we treat our animal and insect relatives, how we treat Mother Earth, Kiaswani, is really, it really is impacted by how we see the world and how we interpret the world. So those are very, very important things. And I think, so as a part of the 7th Generation Fund, for example, we have a program called Thriving Women. And we have a lot of different affiliates that do different things. So for one program that has been funded was having home births, and that bringing those people back to those traditions. And for a lot of Native Americans and others around the world that had been sterilized in the 1970s without their knowledge or through coercion or lack of information. And so, becoming into a facility had been kind of the norm, but actually having your child at home in a traditional way had not been the norm. And so people were out there taking that option with the sisterhood around them, and not only that, but also we've looked at domestic violence. We talked about like how we interpret. It's my belief that as women, we interpret the world somewhat differently. I know that there are exceptions, but I do think that because the way that this world works is that we're often looked at as a second-class person, even if it's subtle, even if it's subconsciously. Even when I was a lawyer too, I know that not only just my gender, but my look, how people interpreted me. I was either the interpreter, I was the clerk, I was somebody there to assist, but I wasn't the lawyer, and I certainly wasn't the judge. And as we go through our lives in the individual things that we do, I also think that has an application for that world peace. I want to just give you one example. I'm a supervising judge in my courthouse in Los Angeles. And recently, within the last year, there was a manslaughter case where a woman killed a young man. The family came in and they had a whole PowerPoint presentation on his life. And the woman was pregnant. So at the time, we waited until after she had her child to bring her back into court. And while this presentation was ongoing, I felt very, very sad for the victim's family. But I also felt a deep compassion for the woman who had killed that man, the young man. And as she sat there sobbing in court, I also was moved, and I was crying. The tears are dripping down my cheeks. And one of the things that I said was, if this is a situation that could have been avoided, and I feel compassion for everyone. And I also talked about myself as a person, as a human being. yes, I have a role as a judge to deal with these circumstances, these criminal cases that come before me. But as a human being, I see this picture, this bigger picture. And so I said, crying may not, some people may not think that crying is judge-like, but I said, but it is definitely a sign of my humanity and how I think about everybody here. So there's this way you have to sometimes have the courage not to be, I must have, because in many of the aspects that I'm different than other people. And I think there's nothing light about having compassion in our courtrooms and in these institutions. But I do want to bring up that in the history in the United States, when the Americans came and made treaties with different people, some of the Native American groups when they went in, they said, "Where are you women? Where are you women?" Because it seemed odd that they would make agreements for a whole group of people without women being present. It's the way that the settlers came and looked at us has had a long lasting impact, not just in the United States, but all over the world, because that has affected us in how we see each other as human beings. And even in our language, there's no word. It doesn't specify by gender. It specifies as a person, right? As a human being, which is very different than English. But I think what I wanted to conclude with is that in this peace that we have within, and so we carry that throughout the world in all of the work that we do, whether it be myself at the United Nations dealing with different affiliates across the world, or just in my own home and in my own community. All of these things bring us peace on a global scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for your beautiful words. And, you know, we may wear many hats and undertake different roles in life. And the fact that you are not only an attorney, but a judge and have the ability to transcend your role as a judge and also express the compassion for the party litigants in your courtroom, it does indeed express your humanity. And of course, you know, it's one of the great fears in litigation is that we break out in tears because you have to adhere strictly to the roles that you have. But I applaud you for your expression of compassion for all of the party litigants. So thank you so much for that. And now we will go into the question and answer period. And I can see that we will have a very exciting time with our questions here. So I'm going to open the floor for the next 30 minutes to questions and answers. And we have already a question right off the bat for Keisha Bush. And the question, Keisha, is thank you for your presentation. And you spent some time in Senegal researching your book about the Talibé boys. And Senegal has been a conflict area off and on since the early 80s. And what were your impressions about the status of women in Senegal and their roles in peace?
Thank you for that question. I was in Senegal from 2004 to 2008, and I remember a little backtrack. When I was there, I did not consider myself a writer, didn't think that I could be a writer, even though everyone said, great emails, Keisha, you should be a writer. I was like, what are you talking about? So I wrote the book from memory after I returned to the US in 2010. Or 2008, and then I wrote it in 2010. But regarding women in Senegal, I think that was such a great experience for me. So, I had friends who were Senegalese. I had American friends, and I remember hanging out I had a group of women, expats from all over the world. And I remember, especially Western American women had really strong opinions about Senegalese and African women. And I remember conveying one of these opinions. I have no idea what it was at the time, but I conveyed it to a Senegalese friend of mine. And she looked at me and she goes, Keisha, you need to go home to your own country and fight for your own rights. Because Senegalese women, for example, the Chief Justice was a woman, and this is back in 04, 05, whereas the Chief Justice of our own Supreme Court, we've never had a woman who is the head of our Supreme Court, right? That still hasn't happened. And so what I saw in terms of just, Senegal is going through things even today, but what I found when I was there was there was an energy amongst the people, amongst the community and citizens for their equity. And when their political figures were not in line with what the people wanted or want, the people will protest. And that's what we're seeing going on even now today with the current president. Power is very intoxicating. And although you may have only 2 terms, I think it's 2 terms, even the former president wanted to extend his stay and then put his son into a position of power as the next president, and then people pushed back. So what I found in Senegal, and what's really interesting about the Taliban situation when I was living in Senegal, and I would try to talk about why are these children being treated this way? I found that the older Senegalese community, older Senegalese folks were just like, this is tradition, don't talk to me about it. You're a foreigner. And then I would go to my younger Senegalese friends and be like, oh my God, this is terrible. And they were like, yeah, I know, but really quiet. And now there's been pushback, and the needle is pushing towards more justice for the Taliban. There are grassroots organizations that have been started by Senegalese people, which I think is what should happen, right? We, as a foreigner, as an outsider, I can't make change in Senegal, but I can try to uplift. I can try to support. That's my role in any fight for justice, because I need to fight for my own justice here in America. And so, long story short, women are driving the change in regards to the situation of the Taliban. It's women now who are being more vocal. And through that vocality and through that vocalness, they are pushing back against this tradition that was so taboo to touch on. So women as change makers, like everyone has already said, I think we have this fire in us. And when it moves into cohesion, we can definitely, change things for the better. Are they 100% there with the Taliban in Senegal? No, not yet. But it's way better than when I was there in 2004 and 2008. You can talk about it and not get shunned or told to be quiet. And how dare you? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Keisha. And now I'd like to pose this question that was raised to Dr. Karam. So there's a thanks to you for your presentation. And the question is, in general, do you feel feel religions are supportive of women as peace advocates? And if so, can religions be role models of how to respect and include women in peace negotiations, or do they cling to patriarchal ideas and traditional roles?
Gee, how long have we got? Thank you for that question. I think I would say, first of all, we can't speak religions. First too. There's religious institutions, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, each very, very diverse and very much of an institution. There are religious leaders. Sometimes they're in institutions, sometimes they not belong to institutions, but they're ordained, or they are not ordained, but they are working as faith leaders in their communities. There are religious non-governmental organizations that are doing humanitarian and development work. And then there are communities of faith. So when we speak of religions, it's important to understand what we're referring to, because obviously all of these are not the same. Now, having said that, if we look at almost all the holy books and the narratives that the faith narratives in different traditions, there is a very central role for women and men. They're both created, both integral, both necessary. One doesn't function without the other. So if we assume that men are important for peace, then, well, the other half too. Thank you very much, because they can't do it on their own. So that's just a very basic logic that is actually inherent in the understandings of most, if not all, faith traditions. The challenge is that religious institutions are not necessarily the most women-friendly structures going. And, it's not surprising, because usually most institutions are not really women-friendly. You have to make them, you have to transform them, as the judges and the lawyers and the politicians and members of parliament will tell you. They enter into these very male cultural spaces. They're not just male dominated. The cultures of those spaces are very male-ish, and they have to change them and transform them. And that's not easy, because institutions are extraordinarily resilient entities. So religious institutions are slightly different than faith traditions, than holy books, than the way people live their faith. So yeah, I think it's important that we take those nuances and discrepancies into account and realize that we are born with two hands, and we are men and women, and it's kind of hard for any community to be all male or all female, for that matter. We need one another. And so wherever men are supposed to be integral and necessary, that's also where women are supposed to be integral and necessary. It isn't just about faith, it's about the basic thing to all faith traditions, which is reason. And by the way, the basic thing to that is emotion.
So thank you so much, Aza. And we have a question next for Dr. Meyer. And the question is, can the Hawaiian tradition of Ho'oponopono be adopted in concept or in part in larger context to foster peace in a community setting? And maybe, Manilani, you can share, first of all, what is Ho'oponopono?
Mahalo nui for that question. Ho'oponopono is our ritualized way of communication, so that we can reestablish good relationships. And so we heal through this ritual way of communicating. It is not what is currently seen throughout the world as a statement slogan. But if you can say to people, I love you, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you. If you could start with that, that is the beginning. That is the opening of a Hawaiian ho'oponopono, because you have to enter into a discussion of relationality and forgiveness with a willingness to be a part of that process. But what the short answer to that, Audrey, is yes and no, because ho'oponopono in a Hawaiian setting, one of the 5 main tenets that we all agree to is that you have to be willing to reinstate your aloha for one another. And if there was no aloha in the first place, because you don't know them, you don't care for them, there's no aloha to return to. So when they tried to get us to do ho'oponopono for the mauna of us protecting Mauna Kea, we said no, or the group said no, because ho'oponopono is for people that had once loved each other. And so it's not mediation. It's not a panacea for everything. When you use pono to get back to pono, ho'oponopono means the activation, which I love that word, Keisha, to activate truth or relative truth to get back to absolute truth, which is loving. And we do that ritually through communication, through the kindness of our words. It is facilitated by a haku, a facilitator. And it is an authentic way of getting back to right relationships. So no, it's not a panacea for everyone, but yes, the aspects of Ho'oponopono can be used by everyone. So when we bring the idea of mihi out, mihi is our word for forgiveness, but the ancient understanding of mihi is to mentor. And at the center of mentoring is love. And so we can practice mihi with each other when after a meeting or after a class, people actually summarize what they've learned from each other. So in my classes, we mihi at the end to practice oracy, to practice authentic thinking and centering our intellect in our heart. We have absolutely keen on this practice. And then ho'opono, which is the activation of truth-telling at all times. You know, truth is recognized. You don't vote whether people are telling truth. You just recognize, and truth heals us. So another aspect is kukulu kumuhana, which is what Deborah, your people did when you prayed for the whole world. That's kukulu kumuhana for us. When you pull energy, kukulu kumuhana is you pull that energy of intentionality for a specific purpose. These are old and ancient ideas. We are accessing our cultural rejuvenation and our cultural strength through our language. So for me, it's not so much about speaking our language, it's about understanding the key principles that have kept Hawaiians unique and evolving. We are in evolution right now, and Ho'oponopono is one of the tools for peace and peacemaking, but it's not a panacea for everybody. But the principles are universal, and that those are key. And I think that's what Indigenous culture can offer the planet, because Indigenous is not a separate idea. Indigenous simply means continuity. Those that continued specific to a place. And philosophically, indigeneity is about continuity. We call it mo'o. Mo'olelo is our word for story. Mo'opuna is our word for grandchild. Mo'okuauhau is our word for genealogy. So how do we continue on this planet? We learn how to love. And there it is. Thanks for that, Audrey. Mahalo nui.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That is the important L word that may we hear more and more of every day that we live, saying it, thinking it, and putting it into action. So thank you so much, Manilani. And there's a question for Deborah Sanchez. And the question is, can you share your thoughts on how Indigenous female elders are regarded in their communities and their role in fostering social peace and harmony?
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of women elders groups that go to different places and talk to communities about I guess, that continuity that we were just talking about. And one of the things that I think that they are held in high regard by most traditional people. What I have seen in communities is that if people are coming back into their culture, they're not maybe as receptive to the women elders or to any elders. They've been separated from some of the traditions, and so they're trying to find their way. And I think that to the credit of the elders that are there, attempting to help people find their place in the world, is that patience. I think that a lot of us have talked about the younger people that have been separated from cultural and even ourselves, because we can't live the way we lived. We can't do the things we did. And part of that has to do with a lot of other things like pollution. And so I do think that women elders hold a place for traditional people, and the more traditional, the more high regard they're taken as. But I do see kind of I don't know if it's a trend, it's anecdotal, it's observational, that there is when people have been separated from their culture, it creates a conflict sometimes in maybe how they see themselves in their individuality versus a communal or community-based way of living.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And we have a general question to anyone on the panel. What institutions and structures need to change the most to pave the way for women's further participation in the peace process? Is it governments or just society in general? Now, that's a big question. Who would like to answer? So now our panelists are being shy. Let's not be shy. I'm sure you all have very powerful perspectives. Okay, Keisha.
Okay, I'll just put one out there. I think when there are two ways to enact change. You can do it from the ground up, or you can do it from top down, right? In terms of how do we change this, how do we enact change that impacts everyone? And in my opinion, if we're talking about America, because that's where we are for the most part right now, I would say government. But it's so interesting because government and corporate America, it's like when you say one, you're saying the other. Okay? So somewhere in that space, I would say change, because the people have again and again tried to make and enact change. Collectively, we have the radical movements of the 60s and 70s, which we dubbed as the civil rights movement, but it wasn't just Black people. It wasn't just the Black community. It was the Native community, the Mexican community, the LGBT, the women's movement, the Catholic, I think it was the right. I mean, like everybody was activated at that time. And then our most recent sort of movement was Occupy Wall Street, in that it was bringing and it brought people from every different background and walks of life. And I was talking to a friend of mine and she goes, yeah, the reason why Occupy Wall Street wasn't successful is there was no leadership. And I'm like, no, it was a collective and very organized movement amongst the governors and mayors across the country. And they coincided in cracking down and using land laws to move the activists all across the country off of public land. And so we know the people can come together. We know the people can come together, activate and cause worry for corporate America, which therefore then translates into our political structures of our government. So I don't know, really. I guess my answer is the thing we call government, which is also corporate America.
Okay, well, that's interesting because there's a lot of analysis that is being more seriously undertaken now, and the role of corporate American transnational corporations and the whole globalization movement and the impact it has had not only on ourselves and our well-being, but on the environment as well. So thank you so much. And of course, these are huge questions. And unfortunately, we had very complex questions that go from Morocco to Ukraine and Lahaina and Libya, and how does that impact the quest for equality for women? But unfortunately, we only have 80 minutes for this panel, and I would love to be able to hear your thoughts on these complex questions and the intersectionality on all of these different, seemingly disparate incidences arising from climate change and how that impacts women and all of us, frankly. But in any event, I'd like to end with a question for our panelists. That's a general question, but the question is, do you have any thoughts on how we as individuals can become peace brokers in our own lives and communities? So from the global challenges, we bring it to the personal, and who would like to answer that question? Yes, Aza.
I think we have to be diligent in insisting on loving one another at the hardest possible times, in the harshest possible moments, when things are absolutely tough. We have to remember to feel the love for one another, including for those who hurt us, who abuse us. We have to remember to focus on the love for one another. That is my humble opinion.
Thank you. Here's that powerful L word again, love, love. And I do recall 4 people from Liverpool who said, love is all you need. So very important words. So in any event, I will now give an opportunity for each of our panelists to give their conclusory comments, what they would like the audience to remember of your powerful presentations today. And so we'll have 3 minutes each to give your conclusory comments. So we'll start with Keisha. Go ahead, Keisha.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, everyone on this panel. This has been such an uplifting and energizing experience for me in the middle of a very busy week. I know everyone has so much on their plate, and work can feel it can get demoralizing sometimes without rest. But there were a couple of things that everyone on this panel, Aza, Menulani, and Deborah and Audrey have mentioned. And one of the things that you all have all mentioned is kindness and the importance of it. And somewhere along my own journey, I learned that I decided that I choose to be kind. It's a choice. Even on my most tired day, when I'm not talkative, I'm naturally kind of a moody person. You wouldn't see that right now, but I am. And, when I'm not in a chatty mood, I still say thank you, right? That came up. I think it was, yes. Manulani, you mentioned, I love you, thank you, forgive me, right? I practice forgiveness for myself, and through my self-practice of forgiveness and forgiving myself for the harm that I've caused and the harm that I didn't know that I caused other people, I'm able to practice that same forgiveness for others. When I practice kindness, I try to practice kindness for myself, and therefore it's a practice. One of the things that another thing that I practice is joy. So hear me out for a second. I practice joy as a radical form of protest to the inequity and injustice in the world. And it's oh, are you fake happy? I'm not fake happy. I'm really angry, actually, but I'm a joyful rage. Can my rage also be joyful? Whether I'm cracking jokes about it or just acknowledging, because we do live in a really inequitable world, but anger and holding that anger and giving it space and real estate in your body literally causes disease, and it will kill you. So this idea that I'm not racing to my grave, we live in inequality and then I'm gonna die, and you never know what's around the corner, but I'm not trying to rush there. So how do I run this marathon or walk this marathon? Yeah, I'm gonna walk it. But and how do I do that in a way that is caring for this body? I remember my brother gave me a very beautiful bracelet years ago, and I was so gentle with it, and it was in a velvet box, and I would put it up in a closet in a special place. And I realized I don't even treat myself that way. So now I have to treat myself like this precious stone, this precious being that is in the world. And one of those ways is by practicing joy, right? And finding moments of it. And it doesn't mean that I'm not serious and I'm not solemn and I'm not trying to put good work out into the world, and my heart doesn't break for all of the suffering that I see around me. But then what I do is I feel it in my body, I let it sit there, and then I try to use it as some form of energy to bring joy and kindness into the world. But it starts with me. So I practice joy, I practice kindness, and I tell the people that I care about and whom I love, I just tell them, we're not a culture where we just go, I love you to people we're close to, but like I do it, like, yeah, I really love you. Okay, I'll see you soon. And now my friends and community, they say it back to me, and it feels so good. Like when someone says I love you, I'm like, oh, I'm loved, So that is my 3-minute summation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I love hearing that love word going all over this panel and all the people who will be hearing it on this broadcast. So thank you so much. And now, Aza, you now have the floor to give your conclusory remarks.
Remark number 1, what Keisha said. Remark number 2, I think women have an obligation to care for themselves and for one another, and to exemplify and uphold the way that they care for one another, because that will be the root of the transformation that we need for point number 3, which is we have to look after this planet. We think we can. We need to show it. And therefore, we need to care for the whole of the planet. Begins with oneself, and then one's own gender, and then everybody else. Thank you.
So much. And Manalani, your conclusory comments, please.
Okay, gang, everything matters now. Absolutely everything. So please understand that energy begets energy, begets energy, begets energy, begets energy. We are not isolated. We just think we are. We are not disempowered. We just think we might be. We are way more powerful than we can ever imagine, because we're infinite, energetic, creative, light beings. So here in Hawaii, we're practicing Awamo Kuleana. Awamo Kuleana means a channel, energy channel of winking vaginas. I love saying that because it's a channel of procreative joy that gets turned on when you're doing your excellence. And I'm doing my excellence, and it better be different from yours, because we are the same differently. And you have to say the energetic field of wholeness in all thoughts now. It's always been whole. So Awamo Kuleana metaphorically and spiritually means collective transformation through individual excellence. Through individual excellence. We transform not because, I'm such a badass. It's because we're all badasses together, and we have to connect and find each other. And that's what women do brilliantly. We do it because communion is our superpower. Relationality is our superpower. So heal yourself, everybody, and begin to feel the energetic center inside of you. Like Rumi always says, be source, not result. Be source, not result. So Maukelo no Hawaii, there's always love for that expansive and infinite process we know called aloha. So please learn that L word, but here in Hawaii, it's called aloha. Ulua e kevelina a ke aloha. Loving is the practice of an awake mind. Let's awaken together during this Peace Week. Mahalo nui.
Thank you so much, Manalani. I just love that. Loving is the practice of an awake mind. Those are beautiful words to remember. So thank you so much. And now, Deborah Sanchez, your conclusory comments, please.
Yes, I think, I didn't get a chance to really talk about it, but I do want to, I think that what I would love everyone to come away with is that these structures that are set about globally, all over the world, that are not conducive to bringing people together to love, to care for one another, I believe that we can actually manifest a different world by exactly not only just what we believe, but how we do things. And you can just imagine a different world. And I don't think that that's too much. For example, one of my friends, Anatsu Taylor, who's an author of a book about racism, she said, you can't find justice in the redistribution of stolen goods. So I think what I'm trying to say there is that there is an inherent value in the love and in the earth and in people that I think is not getting its due. And if we look at a world that's so different from maybe what we see right now, where there's a lack of understanding, there's a marginalization of people or categories of people that we can change. And that's also in an elevated mind, how we think about the world and how we think about each other. And that part can absolutely manifest itself in a global change and a universal, actually, even in the universe, because of what we're doing on a daily basis. Elevate your mind, elevate the world.
Thank you so much. And of course, it is our personal responsibility to do our best to live what Mother Teresa said is the only religion, and that is kindness. And every moment that we live, we have an opportunity to be expressions of that kindness in every living thought, speech, and action. So thank you so much. It's been 23 years since the United Nations adopted Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. And it acknowledges the impact of armed conflict in women and girls and affirms the critical role of women in preventing and resolving conflicts and promoting peace and security. And we've heard so much this morning, and we have been so privileged to hear the powerful words of our women's panelists on this whole aspect of the role of women in peace and security globally. So Resolution 1325 and the 9 subsequent reaffirming UN resolutions address how states must ensure that women at all levels of decision-making are full, equal, and meaningful participants in the peace process. And the resolutions also call for measures to protect women and girls from abuse and sexual violence in situations of armed conflict, and aim to remove the social, cultural, and political barriers to women's full participation in the peace process. However, gender equality continues to be a challenge, and it is this persistent challenge, through unhealthy patriarchal norms and attitudes, and the unequal power dynamics at all levels of society is of great concern. So breaking down patriarchal traditions requires persistence, perseverance, and ongoing education to reinforce the truth of equality and women's rights. And so the truth word has also come in very prominently in today's conversation, because to live life in alignment with your values, your innermost values, requires this integrity of relationality with yourself and everyone in your life and all of life itself. So if the goal is lasting peace that embraces the basic human values of safety, security, abundance, health, and love, it is critically important that women's voices are heard in the rooms where the road to peace is determined. And I really want to express again my deepest appreciation to Unity Earth, Ben Bowler, and your entire team for creating a forum for this important discussion, which we just had today. And my gratitude to our 4 speakers for taking time out of your very busy days to offer your perspectives and insights today. And as we move through our many global challenges, we must remember that peace does begin with each individual, and cultivating love, harmony, and peace in our hearts affects our families and our loved ones and grows to touch our communities, our leaders, and society. And this is what we mean by global transformation. Just as a pebble, a seemingly singular pebble being dropped in the water creates a beautiful radiating pattern, so too can our loving thoughts, loving speech, and loving actions move outward to generate beautiful expressions of peace and equality for all. So thank you so much, everyone, and aloha nui loa. Much love to all of you from Honolulu, Hawaii, from California, that is Deborah Sanchez, and from Manilani, I, of course, are in Hawaii, and Keisha and Aza Karam are on the East Coast. So we have gone trans-Pacific and transcontinent today, and to embrace the whole world with the powerful words of these powerful women. Thank you all so very much. Aloha. Bye-bye.